Hi, this is Brandy Schantz, and you're listening to Living Chronic. Today I'm speaking with Emma Polette again today. She is a return guest on Living Chronic and one of my favorites from season one. So, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much for having me back. This is really exciting.
I really, really enjoyed your last visit and our conversation. And introducing me to the concept of Ahimsa was so big. I even incorporated it into my logo for Living Chronic
Did
because I
you?
loved how you explained it. And of course, I also follow you on Facebook. So I get to see what you're posting daily. And you've done a lot of really great. So I share your posts frequently. And you did a post on Ahimsa. And I had so many friends comment, oh my goodness, I've been trying so hard to get my mind around this concept. And this was explained perfectly. So thank you for helping not just me, but so many people that I share your information with.
Oh, that's so good. I mean, I think we said this last time, but I think Ahimsa could be the best thing that people with chronic illness could practice because we're already suffering. So, like, why do we have to make ourselves suffer more by beating ourselves up about it? What we need is that loving kindness. And so I'm really glad that you've been able to share that with your listeners.
Thank
Yeah.
you for introducing me to it. It's been I mean, I just loved it, and this is a really good I think this is good timing. I know you just finished up your year of yoga, and now
Mhm.
you're starting a new one because you
Yes.
said you learned so much from the first year. So tell me
Yeah,
what the
that's
second
right.
year might look like for you.
Well, last year, I think I said this to you, like, as a Westerner who's a yoga teacher, I did a very Western kind of training. So, and yoga is this amazing, 2,000-year-old practice that's been around, and it's from South Asia, and it's got a really long history, and it's very revered in India and places like that. And in the Western world, it's very much about the physical practice and can you do a handstand on the edge of a mountain looking like you're wearing a size 2 outfit.
Yes.
That's what it seems to be about. And so last year, I was really pleased with how much I learned about the philosophy of yoga, which, Ahimsa is part of that. And I think that it really has helped me with my chronic illness, and it's really helped me with my happiness, like my genuine happiness. And
Mhm.
so I felt like last year was that kind of foundational year of learning about the philosophy. And this year I want to be really more, I don't know, I guess mindful and more proactive in using the philosophy every single day. So I think last year I did it without really documenting it, whereas this year I'm trying to document it. So every day, I started doing it on TikTok. So I've never been on TikTok before, and I did started doing a video a day. But as soon as I started doing a video a day, which I'm only up to day 12, I think today. Um, after about 5 days, you know what it's like with a chronic illness. Then there's a day where you're like, I just don't want to be on a camera, and I don't want to be in public, and I don't want to talk to anyone.
Yes.
So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to document it. I'm writing notes every day, but I thought about maybe doing a short podcast episode because at least then I don't have to show up physically. I can just talk into a microphone.
Yes.
I'm not
Yes.
sure, so I'm still working on how I'm going to document it and share it. But I feel like that's what I want to do this year is more of just on a daily basis, sharing with people how you can use yoga on a daily basis. So things like Ahimsa and I mean, all the other tools. But that's my plan this year is more of that documentation and sharing it with others. Yeah.
I really love everything that you do, and you're right. It's very difficult being chronically ill. One thing I tried hard, I mean, I really put a lot of focus on it, was having a video part of this podcast and doing,
Mm.
short videos on TikTok and YouTube. And the reason I wanted to is because I hate looking at myself so many days. Especially, if you're on prednisone, you've got your face is
Mm.
big, everything looks terrible, or if I'm having a really bad flare day, sometimes I look extremely pale. And it's so difficult for me to look at myself in the mirror. And I thought, you know what? I bet everybody else feels this way too. Let me put forward some effort into getting on camera, even when I look terrible and I don't
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah.
But even still, there's days where I'm like, you know what, we just won't put the video of this. You
Yeah.
know, I can't look at myself. You know, I think for those of us dealing with chronic illness, we're probably the only people in the world who felt for Kate Middleton long before she even told us what she had.
Mm-hmm.
Princess Kate.
100%. Yeah.
We were all defending her no matter what. I said, if she doesn't want to be on camera, she doesn't need to be on camera. And somebody mentioned puffy face. And of course, it completely triggered me. And I'm like, well, then, don't leave her alone. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it is interesting. We hate being on camera from time to time.
Yeah, I don't
But
know why. It just feels like a real effort sometimes, like
it
to
does.
be on
Yeah.
camera. Whereas I feel like just talking doesn't feel as effortful, but I don't know. We'll see.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
you gotta do all the things, and then you have to focus
Mm,
on, you know, what you look like. It is difficult. It is difficult.
yeah.
So you have good news though in your chronic illness fight. You no longer have endometriosis. You finally made it to that side of things.
Yeah. So when we spoke last time, I was convinced I still had endometriosis, but it turns out that I didn't. And I think I'd just seen a doctor who'd been quite a gaslighter and sort of said, "Oh, I think you've got a back problem." And it was a really stressful time. And then I saw a different specialist, and he said, "No, you know, we've done an MRI. You definitely don't have endometriosis. We'd be able to see it if you did." But but sort of didn't do anything else about it. It was a very strange conversation. He seemed really concerned, but didn't really offer anything for me. But what's happened in Australia is we're very lucky that the federal government has created endometriosis and pelvic pain clinics, and there's
Mm.
22, I think, across Australia. And I live in a regional part of Western Australia, and there's two in Western Australia, and there's one in my town. So I'm bloody lucky, because
Yes.
if it was at the other end of Australia, Western Australia, I would never be able to use it. So very, very lucky. So I've attended that pelvic pain clinic, and it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, because before I even saw a doctor, I had a 1 hour, I think it was, session with their clinic manager to get my history, so that when I saw the doctor, I didn't have to go through all my history. They could actually talk about my condition. And, you know, I turned 50 last year, towards the end of last year. And so when I was telling this person about my illness and how long I'd had the pain and how many surgeries I'd had and all those things, she just looked me in the eye and she said, I might cry. She just looked me in the eye and said, "You've been dealing with a lot for a really long time, haven't you?" And I was just like, that's such a small thing, but
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that before, because all people wanted to do was just try and fix me, or, you know, "Oh, I can't fix you, go and see this doctor, or go and do this." Or even my family are kind of like, "Oh, we're sorry you feel sick." But it was just first time I felt really seen. I guess because she'd seen, you know, 100 different patients with endometriosis, she really understands what it was like. And so that was quite amazing. And then I saw a doctor, and that was quite good, but she referred me to a pelvic pain or pelvic physiotherapist. And so now I'm getting physiotherapy, because what's happened is I don't have a endometriosis, but I have what's called a hypertonic pelvic floor, which just means my pelvic floor is switched on all the time. And the
Mhm.
way that physio explained it is, if you're holding your fist like in a fist, imagine if you held that all day, you'd start to get like pain into your arms, and you'd feel pain in your fist. And so she said that's why you've got a lot of pain in your back or whatever, because all the muscles around your pelvic floor are switched on, because you're always like that. And then when you're
Mm.
having a really bad pain flare, it's kind of like someone's gone and grabbed your the fist, and it's squeezing on top of that, and that's the even more pain. So it was really incredible to have someone explain to me what was going on. And now that I know, I can deal with it better. It's amazing how knowing what it is a big change.
Yeah.
So, for instance, recently I was doing a lot of physical work in my yard. I was oiling the deck, doing lots of painting, and I did a little bit more than I knew I should have. And in my head, I'm like, I'm doing too much now. I should stop. But I just have just a little bit more to do. I'm just going to do it. And of course, predictably, within about 5 minutes of finishing, I got extreme pain in my pelvis, like really one of the worst pains I've ever experienced. But I was like, that's my pelvic floor spasming because I've done too much work. I'm going
Yes.
to take some ibuprofen. I'm going to put a heat pack on, even though it's summer and I was sweating. And I'm just going to lie down and rest. And within about an hour and a half, the pain had gone.
Oh, that's
In the
great.
past, when that had happened, I'd be like, what is that? Why am I in pain? What's going on?
Mhm.
Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And the pain would last for days. Whereas,
Yeah.
like, because I knew what it was and I would have treated it the same, but it was the mental part of like going, shit, 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 what's going on, um, has really made a big difference. And so there's two sides to it. Sometimes I think I'm hyper aware of, oh, if I do this, I might be in pain. And I sometimes wonder if I talk myself into pain as well as kind of talking myself out of pain.
Yeah.
But it's just a really interesting situation. So with the pelvic floor physio, she actually does, like, it's quite uncomfortable, but she does internal physiotherapy on my pelvic floor. So she's like releasing my pelvic floor to help release that. And of course, that's meant that sometimes I'm experiencing stress incontinence now because my pelvic floor is starting to loosen a little bit. It's not
Yes.
strong in other ways. So sometimes if I cough or sneeze, now I'm experiencing a bit of, incontinence from that. So, that's uncomfortable, but it shows that my pelvic floor is starting to change, which means that there is some healing and changing
Yeah.
going on. And I'm about to start seeing, it's taken a while to get into her, but I'm about to start seeing a specific pelvic pain psychologist, because what I've read a lot of is part of the reason why my pelvic floor is that switched on all the time is because my brain has learned to be like hyper vigilant. It's like, oh my God, I've had so much to deal with. I've just got to make sure that I'm not dealing with other things. And so my body's always tense. And there's quite often usually a trauma part of this with pelvic floor, hypertonic pelvic floor. And I recognize that there's probably some, mental health things that I need to work through as well. So that's going to be huge. But it all feels worthwhile. And it's so interesting because when I would have spoken to you last time, I would have thought the only thing that's going to fix me is surgery. That's the
Right.
only way I'm going to get rid of the pain. But what I've also learned is that because the more surgeries you have for endometriosis, the more pain you're likely to get because you get scar tissue and,
Yes.
adhesions and all those things. So, to find a way to be looked after that doesn't involve surgery is mind blowing to me. But it's just amazing how much has changed in, even the 6 to 9 months that we last spoke, how much has changed in the way that I could be treated. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Over this last year, since starting the podcast, I've learned so much about the connection between your brain and the pain we feel.
Mm,
And I've even started to notice, like you, I'm anticipating the pain. Like I just know it's coming. And learning how to turn that off is very difficult. And
mm,
here in the United States, I have never even heard of a, pain specific pain management psychologist. And I would love to see that more often because the more I learn about our brain connection to our pain, the more I realize that a lot of our pain can be dealt with in a way that completely excludes pain pills, which is the
mm.
usual way most people go. You experience pain, you get a pain pill. It's
Yeah.
one after another. Even though we're considerably hyper aware of the effects of something like an Oxycontin, a pill of that magnitude, because people do become addicted, and it's a big problem here in the U.S. Um, that's still the go-to for pain. Hand them a pill,
Yeah.
get a pill.
Yeah.
And I would love to see something more like what you're experiencing there in Australia. And I can't wait to hear more about what it's like going to see this pain management psychologist.
Yeah, and she sounds really interesting because I think she also works with people who have had trauma in the medical system, who have been gaslit or who have had a bad outcome from a surgery and those kind of things as well. And I think that's such a needed thing. I think a big part of my pain with endometriosis has been because I felt so gaslit, and I felt like no one's listening to me, and I'm going to have all this pain and no one's ever going to help me. And so, there's a lot of that. That's part of the trauma I need to work through, is the trauma I've experienced in the medical world, Yeah.
We've got to have a whole nother conversation about this one day after you've seen the therapist,
Yeah.
because it's interesting. I have now handed over a lot of my medical care management, I guess we should say, to my husband. Because as I told you, I've had a migraine that lasted over a month. And when I started making those phone calls, trying to get to a doctor to help me and, get to the right test, it was just, I said to a friend of mine, I said, at the risk of sounding really overly dramatic, there's almost a PTSD here. Like, I just can't call any more doctors. I can't go through this. And now I have my husband coming with me to every appointment. And he's the one out there
Yeah.
making appointments for me, because I'm like, you know what? There is trauma involved when you've gone through something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, we're short on any kind of mental health care in the US anyways, but to have a pain
Yeah.
management psychologist and somebody to deal with medical trauma would be huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah. Well, I'm really happy to talk to you again in a couple of months when I've had a few sessions with her and let you know what it's like.
Ugh, I'm excited.
Yeah.
So, there's been a lot that you have going on that really is, I think, is so important. Things that maybe we think about it, but people don't take the next step. Some things we never talk about. The first one is you've given up some work. So you have less money, but more health and more happiness.
Yeah.
That's to me, that is one of the most difficult things you can do, because, the money people, we always were programmed, I think, to just keep working, 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 more money, more money, more money. So to kind of, unravel yourself out of this, you know, hamster wheel of life to get your health together, I think is really, it really shows how hard you worked, because it's very difficult. Like, most people can't really make that leap.
Yeah, I think that year of yoga has really informed that. Like, one of the big principles in yoga is something called a parigraha, which is like non-hoarding, non-greed. And so
Oh,
I've sort of realized that there's a lot of things that we all want that you don't necessarily need. And I
yeah.
think sometimes the more shit you have, sorry about my language, but the more stuff we have is like the more we've got to look after. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, that's more stuff
Yeah.
to tidy away, or that's more stuff to, you know, look after. And so that's been a really important realization for me, is I don't need a lot of stuff. I'm very lucky because I live in a friend's granny flat in her backyard, and she doesn't charge me very much rent. And there'll be one day, she's a lot older than me, that that won't be available for me anymore, and I guess that's something to worry about. But I need to heal now to be able to
Right.
deal with that when that happens. And so I made this year, like, I try to choose a word for the year every year, and I made this year's word healing. And I just decided
Oh,
I'm going to do whatever it takes to heal myself, as best as I can. I may never be fully healed, but as best as I can. And I was doing some social media work for some small businesses that I had, that, like, my friends that own some small businesses in my town, because I've got a marketing degree and I don't mind doing that kind of stuff. But I just found that, like, on those days when I was having a flare, in the back of my head, I'd be like, but I've still got to do that social media work. Like, oh.
yeah.
And so, yes, it was definitely, some nice income every month, but it just meant that I always had this thing in the back of my head, always. And there was
Yeah.
never a moment where I could really and truly rest. And with the research that I've done around the pelvic floor, pain that I have, resting is so important. That's part of helping my pelvic floor, is to be able to fully, really, and truly rest.
Yes.
But what's been really amazing about giving up the work is that then other opportunities have come in that I wasn't expecting. So I've talked about how I'm seeing a pelvic floor physiotherapist at the pelvic pain clinic for endometriosis. She's asked me to run a workshop with her. So I'll get
Oh,
to work with all of the women who are in the pelvic pain clinic to do like a yoga workshop with them. And,
yeah,
things like that have just popped up. So it's like that won't replace the income, but it's just another way for me to get my name out there and that sort of thing. So I just sort of feel like that's another part of yoga, is this kind of idea of surrendering and knowing that you kind of will be looked after in the way you're supposed to be looked after. And I feel
yeah,
like that's what's happening for me at the moment. And I've just never been in a position in my life. Like, we've just had the Easter long weekend. So in Australia, we get 4 days off over the Easter break. And I haven't had anything to do. I haven't had to go anywhere. I haven't had any work that had to get done. There's been nothing. And I can't remember in my whole life when I felt like that. And so I think that's going to be a huge part of my healing process as well, is being able to actually really rest. And
yeah,
that to me is worth way more than money right now,
absolutely. There's a fine line, I think. I always tell people some stress is good. You
Yeah.
can't remove stress from your life because you
Mm,
didn't also remove the good things. We get a lot
mm,
of great things in life from stress. And the other thing I like to, tell people is you can't just sit at home all day long thinking about being disabled. It's just not healthy.
mm, mm.
You have to be engaged. It's very important to push yourself in some respects. But on the other end, you have to know when it's time to just take a step back and heal.
Yeah.
And it can't be said enough when you finally do that, when you need it, just how good it is for you. And I was telling
Yeah.
you earlier, I did the same thing. I had surgery in November. And at first I thought, well, let me just keep up and keep going. I'm going, trying to do things. And somewhere along the way, I realized, you know what? I'm not even doing the things that I'm trying to do well. So what's the point? And I kept feeling
Yeah.
terrible. And I finally just kind of, washed my hands of it, sat back and binged Real Housewives. And I laid on that couch and I watched Real Housewives. And it was healing in a way that I never could have anticipated.
Yeah.
Just
Exactly.
take a break and let yourself heal.
Yeah. Yeah. And there'll be other opportunities in the future, and I can pick up more work at another point in time. But right now, this is what I
Exactly.
need.
Take care
Yeah.
of yourself. Take
Yeah.
care of yourself. And you're doing, again, you know, I love following your Facebook page. To me, you're doing it so well. And I think it's just, I like to model some of how I'm doing things, how I'm getting through my own chronic illness and how I'm dealing with, the emotions attached to that, by a lot of it by watching what you're doing, because I think it's so great. And I talk about this all the time and you're open about it. So I thought, you know what, let's really talk about being sober.
Hmm.
Being sober. You are sober and have been for quite some time. And,
Yes.
as we were talking about earlier, people tend to think of alcohol in terms of either you're, an alcoholic, can't do anything, homeless, paper bag in hand, just your whole life has gone to all hell, or everything's fine. And
Mm,
nobody ever talks about that huge ground in between.
mm.
And women in particular, I know it's a real problem in the US. I think it's probably more international than we believe. There's a real problem with women and drinking right now.
Yeah.
How we just
Yeah.
drink to numb the pain or get through the stress or get through the anxiety, deal with our problems. And it's actually the worst thing we could be doing. And
Mm.
you realized that and made a change.
Yeah, I did, because I I really started drinking regularly when I was about 25. That's unfortunately when my dad died. He died quite young. And I remember, like, the night of his funeral, just being not quite blackout drunk, because I remember it, but that was the first time I felt like I was really, really drunk. And I went back home and I moved in with a good friend. And both of our parents had always had like a cask of wine on top of the fridge, and they always had wine every night after, like, with their meals. And so we were in our mid 20s, and we thought, well, that's what adults do, so that's what we're going to do. So we just started drinking every day like that. But we weren't drinking very much. It was just a couple of glasses of wine. But over the years, and I think particularly because of the endometriosis and the pain I was in, like the amount of alcohol I was drinking slowly crept up. And I got to the point where it was pretty much a bottle of wine a night, most nights, almost every night. And I knew that that was a problem. I didn't like how much I was drinking, and I would go through phases where I'd take a month off, or I would take 3 months off, and then I took 9 months off. And every time I stopped drinking, it would take me a few months to go back to the amount of alcohol I was drinking. I'd have a month off, and then I'd be like just drinking if I went out with friends, and it would just be a couple of glasses of wine. And then slowly but surely over a period of time, I'd get back to drinking almost a bottle of wine a night. And then the last time I did it, which was a 9-month break, I had a glass of wine at lunch. And then that night when I got home, I bought a bottle of wine and drank the bottle of wine. So I was like, oh shit, I'm straight back to where I was. And I didn't like it. I didn't like the feeling of it, because I liked how I felt when I was sober. I loved how it felt to be sober, and I loved how it felt to not have to worry, because part of the worry was, okay, today I'm not going to drink. I prefer not to drink today. I'm going to feel really good if I don't have anything to drink today, so I won't drink today. And then by about 5 in the afternoon, I'd be like, oh, I'll just today.
Yeah.
And so then the next day would be, yeah. Then I'd be back the next day. No, I'm not going to drink today. And it would be every day. I'd be like, I'm not going to drink. Oh, I'll drink. I'm not going to drink. Oh, I drink. That takes up so much brain space. Like if you're thinking about that all the time, and I was thinking about it, not constantly, obviously, I live a life, but I was thinking about it a lot. And I was able to manage my job. I was able to manage my career. I was able to manage everything. But I was constantly thinking about the alcohol. The other thing was, because I'm a health coach, I've done lots of study, and I'll never forget this day. I'd gone out to a party, and I used to drink for a social anxiety as well. But then I'd always drink too much, and then I'd have the whole social anxiety the next day of like, did I say something stupid? Was I an idiot? Like, all that stuff. Anyway, I'd had a really big night. The next day I felt really sick and really hungover, and I was reading all this stuff about alcohol. And then I read that there was a theory that sometimes that endometriosis might be partly to do with if you're a heavy drinker, that could make endometriosis worse. And I just remember in that fragile hungover state, I sobbed. I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed for like I remember I was living with my brother at the time, and he was out, and I just couldn't stop crying, because I thought, what have I done to myself? Like, what have I done to myself? And it was the chicken and the egg. Like, the alcohol was partly because of the pain I was in because of endo, but was the endo because I'd been drinking so much since my dad died and all that sort of stuff? And anyway, so I was blaming myself for my illness, and like so much shame, and it was really horrible. But I kept drinking for a number of years after that. And then I had a friend who was starting a skincare business, and she wanted me to use her skincare for a month. So I started using it every morning and every night, because she wanted really good feedback about how the skincare worked, and she wanted you to do it every day for a month. And I didn't like how I felt every night when I was washing my face in the mirror, and looking at myself in the mirror after I'd had a bottle of wine. I didn't like who I was. I guess I didn't like that I didn't have control over it. I didn't like how much brain space it took up. I didn't like, even though there was no hard evidence, but I didn't like that maybe it was contributing to my endometriosis and my pain. I didn't like that I was not allowing myself to feel the pain. I didn't like that I was numbing myself. I didn't like that I felt like I would go out with friends and have a few glasses of wine, and then so I could drive home, like, I'd have 2 glasses of wine, say, but I'd leave my friends early so I could come home, so I could have another glass of wine. You know what I mean? So like I was stopping myself from being social so I could drink more. Like I didn't like any of it. And I don't know. I don't know if I feel comfortable using the word alcoholic, but it was definitely a problem. Like, it was not a problem, you know? And so it was that seeing myself in the mirror every night. I didn't like it. I really didn't like it. But that was in October of 2020. We'd all had a hard year in
Yes,
2020. So like
yes,
everyone's drinking had escalated, I think, that year. Um,
absolutely.
and I thought I'll give up in the new year. But the 1st of January, I think that year in 2021 was a Friday or something. So I'm like, I'm not going to give up on a Friday. I'm going to drink on the weekend. So I gave up on the 4th of January, which was the Monday. And it had been my uncle's birthday on the Saturday. So we always go out to a really nice restaurant with really nice wine. So I had some wine on that day and it was a really nice experience. But of course that night I went home and had a little bit more. So it was a conscious decision. It took me a while to get there from that particular time, but it was that looking at myself in the mirror every night that really did it for me. And I just feel like personally that I can't, and even 3 years later, I don't feel like I can moderate my alcohol. I'm just much better if I'm going to drink, I drink. If I'm not going to drink, it's better for me not to drink at all. And so that's what I do now. And I don't drink. And yeah, it's been 3 and a bit years, and I just like myself better. Like, I
Oh,
like myself so much more, and I'm so like, I don't have any. Sorry, I was gonna say I don't have any anxiety. That's not true. Of course, I have anxiety, but I don't. I don't have as much as I used to. I don't have that daily stress of, am I going to drink or am I not going to drink? And I've learned to feel my feelings, and
yeah.
I know that that's like confronting for a lot of people, but I like that I have feelings now. I like that I cry sometimes, and I like that sometimes I feel lonely, because then I can make decisions on what I can do differently to make myself feel better.
In a
Um,
rational way that's clear, that's not clouded with the
yeah,
out.
yeah. And I just feel like I'm a better person. I like myself a
Yeah.
lot more. Um, So yeah, that's how that's all worked out for me. And I highly recommend it. It's hard though. It's really hard because like what you're saying in the US, it's the same in Australia. We have a hard drinking like
It's a drinking
life.
culture.
You know, that's how it is. It's a drinking culture. And you go out to drink and you stay home to drink and everyone's drinking, you know. And I remember when I gave up, I think it was this time, or it might have been the time I did the 9 months. But I remember when I gave up and I was telling my family, and my sister-in-law was like, "Why?" Like,
Yeah.
she literally went, "Why?" And I said,
Yes.
"Because I drink too much, Beck. You know, like that's why."
Not healthy. I like to have
Mm,
the conversations about it, not because I'm judging anybody or think that I myself drink too much. And I think as a culture, we just don't speak about the unhealthy aspect of what we are doing to ourselves, especially women. We do have a
yeah,
tendency to drink a lot. We, instead of, saying I'm having a lot of alcohol, we'll just blow it off. Oh, it's just the mommy juice. You deserve it. Open another bottle of wine. And you're sort of enabled by all the people around you, all of us. We're in this as a group. We're working as a team somehow to be really unhealthy. And I noticed it myself because, as I said, I've had a migraine for over a month, and just looking at red wine makes me want to, to go up in a
yeah,
ball. Um, but the one thing that came from not being able to drink at all is I realized I was getting much better sleep every night. And I was
hmm,
also more rationally, because even after the fact, even, put aside, when you're sitting at home and you're drinking that glass of wine while cooking dinner and then pouring another one with dinner and one more when you're sitting on the couch, when you have those obvious feelings where you're like, oh, I really am depressed. Oh, my life is terrible. Oh, I'm so chronically ill. I've got all the problems. But even the next day, there's still anxiety and depression that just sort of sits within you because it's just
yeah,
so bad for you. And I admit, I didn't realize how bad I've wanted to talk about it because I know as women, we need to be better. We need to be healthier. This is a problem. It's a societal problem. We're
mm,
getting sicker because we're drinking too much. It's something we all need to talk about, but I don't think I realized just how different you can feel until I myself
Yeah.
could not drink. And I'm like, wow, well, this is better.
Yeah.
And it's hard to explain that to people. And maybe we
Yeah.
should not. I've talked a lot about, I've been having a lot of discussions with quite a few people lately about what terms do we use? Like not most chronically ill people don't consider themselves disabled. We're under the umbrella of the disabled, and maybe that's the wrong word because we are not lacking ability. We just have some other abilities. We need some accommodations for our differing abilities, but I keep saying maybe we need a different word. And you said I don't want to say alcoholic, and I think that's important. Maybe we just don't use the word alcoholic. Maybe we use the
Mm.
something different. Unhealthy alcohol consumption,
Yeah.
excessive, something to describe that it's just not healthy to, you know, drink a bottle of wine every night. It's not
Yeah.
mommy, it's still alcohol.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And
And I
like,
think we were talking before about how, you know, it's a habit. It's definitely a
mhm,
habit, and it's
yeah,
something that you get into, and it's hard to. I used to love it. I used to love it, and I'm not a perfect person. There are moments. It's not very often, but there are moments that I'm like, a glass of wine would just be great right now. Then I wouldn't have to worry. I used to love it. I loved it, but
yeah,
but it's a habit, and it's a great habit because it feels so good and it numbs the pain and it's all that sort of stuff. But
yeah,
compared to, say, something like, overeating or something, like, it's physically changing your brain. It
yeah,
changes the way your brain works, and it changes the way your hormones function, and
yeah,
it changes a lot more than, say, eating too much or
yeah,
going to bed a little bit too late. Like, and I also said to you earlier, it's a carcinogenic. Like, it's a
yeah,
very well known precursor to cancer, and we don't talk about that either.
yeah,
There's lots of
yeah.
things we try to avoid to not get cancer, but we don't talk about alcohol in the
I know
same
I
way, and we
wear like
should.
7,000 these days, but
Yeah,
after I finish lathering up an SPF 1,000, I pour a
yeah,
glass of wine and hang out on the boat.
yeah.
So
That's right. That's right. Yeah,
like, what
yeah,
was that about, Brandy? I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, we just don't talk about the unhealthy nature. Last year, I was
yeah.
talking about it with one of my guests who is a PhD in exercise science, and she teaches and she talks a lot about the alcohol and how it interacts with your fitness abilities. But we talked about just the difference, when she's talking to people, athletes, whatever, about a serving of wine. So we started talking about when I would go to my grandmother's house, she had these little glasses that I would look at as a shot glass today. There's these little teeny, and you put it in your wine, and that was a glass of wine. And of course, today, 2024, each and every one of my wine glasses can probably hold a half a bottle of wine.
Mhm.
They're big,
Yeah,
and you've got these giant glasses. We're like, yeah, I'm having one glass. And no, that's like 3 or 4 glasses right there.
yes, exactly. Yeah,
Done so much to make ourselves feel better. We talk
yeah.
about the community sizing here in the United States. Like, everybody's a size small in the United States. It just depends on how many X's you have before it. You're either extra, extra, extra small, or you're extra small, or maybe just small, but you're small somewhere, right? And we kind of
Yeah,
do the same with wine. You've had one glass, and it's like, it looks like you're
yes,
drinking out of a bowl.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I used to do. Yeah,
That's exactly what I do. And that's
yeah.
why I think I myself started noticing how much I was drinking before the pandemic. We would go over to the country club a lot. And country clubs here in the United States are basically like frat houses for adults. Everybody's drinking, they're drinking heavily. It's just part of the culture. And we'd sit there and we'd get the country club pour, and I'd be like, I just had 2 glasses of wine. And then during the pandemic, when I had to pour that glass myself out of the bottle, I was like, oh, the bottle's gone. I only had 2 glasses. That can't be right.
Yeah,
But it's a real visual when you think,
yeah,
oh, well, this probably isn't good for me, is it?
yeah. What I have found fascinating is that I think part of my drinking was actually dehydration. So like at night
Yes.
time, I've started just drinking sparkling water at night, and I drink I probably drink about 1.5 liters of sparkling water at night watching TV. I
Yeah.
just love, because I used to drink cold white wine, so it's kind of the same, and I drink cold sparkling water. It's kind of the same sensation in
Yep.
a way. So I think one part of why, it was complicated reasons why I drank so much, but I think one of the reasons was I was dehydrated. I needed something to drink at night, like I
Yes.
physically needed, and so that's what part of it was, just, oh well, because I drink that much in water now, instead.
The same. Yeah. It's interesting. I do the same thing because I can't drink right now,
Yeah.
um, because of the migraine. Um, but I bought these sparkling waters infused with magnesium because the
Oh
magnesium is
wow.
supposed to help with, and they're actually delicious. And I just pour
Yeah.
that sparkling water in my wine glass at night, and I drink,
Yeah.
my sparkling water infused with magnesium. And
Yeah.
I'm doing the same thing as I would with the wine. My, hand
Yeah.
up to mouth, back down, up to mouth. It's almost, like something you have to do with your hands almost. And then,
Yeah. And I
having that liquid and
yeah. And I found that when I gave up, um, I as long as I like, that first drink was the one that was the hardest. Like, so if I had a sparkling water instead of a wine, then after that I was fine. But it was just, if I had the first wine, then I was going to always kind of keep drinking wine, kind of thing. So it's just a matter of, even if it's just for a little while, you drink something you wouldn't normally drink, like
right.
a flavored soda or something like that, just for a little while to get you out of the habit. That's worth it, I think.
Oh,
I
I
used to have
agree.
these weird rules that, I wouldn't drink soft drink because of all the sugar, but I'd drink as much wine as I wanted. Like,
So
you can justify anything. Yeah.
we're not going out in the sun without SPF and Coke.
Yeah.
Mm-mm. But yeah, wine and yeah, we're fine. We're fine. Yeah, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Square that,
Yeah.
in our heads,
Yeah.
that the wine is
Absolutely.
okay, but the sun and the sugar and a Coke, that's bad, bad,
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm doing the same thing,
Yeah.
just replacing the old habits with something new.
Yeah.
And another one of the things that really kind of did an aha moment for me is because I've been just drinking the water at night instead of having a wine with dinner or wine while sitting on the couch. I'm hungry all the time.
Right.
Like, oh my God, yes, I've probably lost 1,000 calories out of my
Yes. Yes.
and you just don't think about it.
Absolutely.
And so you're like, it's almost like I
Yeah.
just skipped a meal. What could that be?
Yeah.
I did
Hmm.
skip a meal. Yeah, I
Yes.
really did. So,
Great.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
love, watching you give the updates because it really makes me think. And I hope that this just makes everybody think at least a little bit. It's not that everybody
Mm.
has to quit drinking entirely, but maybe just think of, a moment about our giant glasses of wine. I always tell people, watch an old show from the 50s and see, sometimes you'll see them eating, mimic their portion size. It's,
Yeah.
it'll tell you a lot if you just switch over to their portion size. You'll start to understand how much you're drinking in terms of wine or even eating in terms of food. During one of my like times on the couch, I watched a show that talked about the history of fast food in the United States, and it talked about the introduction of the quarter pounder as an answer to big growing boys that ate a whole lot of food. And I thought, oh my God, that's the smallest burger on the menu now.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I was gonna
Perspective.
yeah. I was gonna say, with just because I've done a course in intuitive eating, and just which is kind of a really anti-diet way of
Yeah.
eating. It's like, everything's okay. But one of the things about intuitive eating is that if eating is the only way that you can comfort yourself, then that's obviously an opportunity. Like, there are many other ways that you can learn to comfort yourself, whether that's through meditation or exercise or seeing a friend or seeing a counselor or journaling, or, like, there's a million different things you can do. And I guess it's the same with alcohol. Like, if alcohol is the only way you feel no stress, then there's some work to do. So, like, if you
Yeah.
can drink alcohol but you've got other things going on in your life that help you a lot with stress, and alcohol is just this nice little thing that you do sometimes, then I think you don't need to quit. But,
Yeah.
and you probably, not anyone has to quit, but if you think the only thing that helps you feel no stress is alcohol, then there's some work to do on that.
Yeah.
There's lots of other ways you can reduce your stress, and you'll probably feel a lot less stressed if you're not drinking so much.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And feel better. Get better
Yeah,
sleep. It's
yeah,
helpful for the things the doctors tell us to do all the time as chronically ill patients. Get good sleep. Reduce your
yes,
stress.
yeah,
It's the easiest way, I think, to take care of the things you're supposed to before you go on to the next thing you need to do to take care of yourself.
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Well, thank you for coming on. I always love these conversations. I'm really excited. I want to hear more about the pain management psychologist because
yeah,
I think we need that in our lives. I think that's very important.
yeah,
And of course, as always, I'll be watching your Facebook page, and you're doing daily yoga on TikTok as well.
yeah,
Um, so be sure to catch those because I really love your insight because it's about the concepts, not just the fitness of yoga.
yeah, yeah. That's the big thing, I think, for me anyway. Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for coming on, and we'll see you again next time to talk more.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Brandy.